Alarms tore through the command deck of the alien warship Krivos Ascendant as every sensor screen flooded with red warnings at once. General Draeth Sol gripped the edge of his console, his 4 eyes locked on a single blinking dot that had appeared out of nowhere at the edge of the disputed border system. A ship, a small one, and it had crossed into Coalition space without triggering a single one of their outer detection nets until it was already close enough to matter. "Identify it," Draeth ordered, his voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the bridge crew. "Unknown design, General," came the reply from the sensor officer, a thin alien named Voru, with pale blue skin that had gone a shade lighter from nerves. "The hull configuration matches nothing in our records. Species unknown. World of origin unknown." Draeth felt his patience thinning. In 300 years of service, he had never seen a vessel slip past the outer nets undetected. The Coalition's detection grid was the pride of their military, built and refined across a dozen wars and 100 treaties. For something to simply appear inside it meant either an extraordinary flaw in their systems or an extraordinary technology behind the intruding ship. "Bring us alongside it," he said. "Non-hostile approach. I want eyes on this thing before we decide what it is." The Krivos Ascendant moved with practiced grace, closing the distance across the dark emptiness between stars. As the smaller ship grew on the view screen, murmurs spread across the bridge. It was battered, scorched along one flank as though it had recently passed through fire or radiation, with patched hull plates that did not match the surrounding metal, and yet its running lights were steady, its course controlled, its approach deliberate rather than desperate. "They're hailing us," Voru said, surprise evident in her voice. Draeth straightened. "Put it through." The screen flickered, then resolved into the image of a being unlike anything in the Coalition's vast catalog of known species. Soft-skinned, with 2 eyes instead of 4, a narrow face, and dark hair that fell loosely around her shoulders. She wore a simple gray uniform, with no visible weapons, no armor plating, nothing that suggested military preparation. She looked almost unbearably fragile. "This is Ambassador Emma Whitfield of the vessel Horizon's Edge, representing the people of Earth," she said, her tone calm and unhurried, as if crossing into hostile alien territory was an everyday errand. "We didn't mean to startle anyone. We're here peacefully, and we'd like to talk." For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. Draeth studied her face on the screen, searching for the telltale signs of fear that every species showed when first encountering an armed Coalition vessel 3 times the size of their own ship. He found none, only patience, and something close to friendliness. "You are inside Coalition territory, without clearance," Draeth said finally. "State your intentions." "We're explorers," Emma replied. "We didn't know this system was claimed. We'll happily follow whatever procedure you require. We're not looking for trouble." Draeth exchanged a glance with his second-in-command, an older officer named Kessa Rune, who had served through 3 border conflicts and had grown used to reading the subtle signs of deception in 100 different species. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Whatever this human was, she did not appear to be lying. "Prepare a boarding party," Draeth said. "We will inspect their vessel and escort the ambassador to a proper hearing. Non-lethal measures only, unless given direct cause." The order was standard procedure, the kind given 1,000 times before when encountering unfamiliar species. But when the boarding team returned, their reports were anything but standard. "General, you need to see this," said the lead technician, a broad-shouldered alien named Torv, as he transmitted data directly to Draeth's console. Their ship's internal logs, environmental readings from their homeworld. Draeth scanned the data, and his 4 eyes narrowed. Radiation exposure levels that should have been lethal within days, listed instead as routine seasonal weather patterns. Temperature swings across a single day that spanned freezing cold to scorching heat, described casually as normal daily variation. References to storms capable of leveling structures, treated in the ship's log with the same tone one might use to describe a light drizzle, and scattered throughout the medical files, notes on countless diseases their bodies had apparently learned to resist over generations, some of them fatal to nearly every other species in the galactic catalog. "This can't be accurate," Kessa said, leaning over Draeth's shoulder to study the readings herself. "No species could evolve under these conditions. Their entire biosphere reads as a survival gauntlet. And yet here they are, Draeth murmured, flying through our territory as if none of it mattered. He looked again at the image, still frozen on the main screen. The soft-skinned woman, with the calm expression, standing in a uniform with no armor, no visible weapon, and no trace of fear. For the first time in longer than he could remember, General Draeth's soul felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his composure. Not alarm exactly, something closer to a warning instinct honed over centuries of studying dangerous worlds and the creatures that survived them. "Bring her aboard," he said quietly. "I want to speak with this ambassador myself." Emma Whitfield stepped onto the Krivos Ascendant with the same unhurried calm she had shown on the view screen, flanked by 2 Coalition guards who towered over her by more than a foot. She glanced around the corridor with open curiosity, taking in the alien architecture, the strange lighting, the unfamiliar hum of machinery built by hands that were not human. If she felt any fear, she hid it completely. "This way," Kessa said, leading her toward the main council chamber where Draeth waited. The chamber itself had been built to intimidate, with high ceilings and dim lighting designed to make visitors feel small beneath the weight of Coalition authority. Draeth stood at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 other Coalition representatives from allied species, their expressions carefully neutral. "Ambassador Whitfield," Draeth said as she entered, "you've caused quite a stir among my crew." "I get that a lot," Emma said, offering something that looked remarkably like a smile. "Sorry about the alarms. We really didn't mean to sneak up on anyone." "Your vessel evaded 3 layers of our detection grid without apparent effort," Draeth said. "That is not something accomplished by accident. Our sensors probably just work on a different frequency than yours," Emma said with a small shrug. "We weren't trying to hide. If it helps, I can have our engineers share the specifications. We're not big on secrets." Draeth studied her for a long moment. Every instinct honed by centuries of dealing with cautious, calculating diplomats from a dozen different species, told him this should not be so simple. And yet everything about her, her posture, her tone, the easy way she held herself in a room clearly designed to make visitors feel powerless, suggested she genuinely meant what she said. "Tell me about your homeworld," Draeth said. "Earth, you called it." "It's a good place," Emma said, something warm entering her voice. "A little rough around the edges, maybe. We've got deserts hot enough to cook an egg on a rock, oceans deep enough to crush most vehicles, and enough storms and earthquakes to keep our engineers busy for centuries. But it's home. Our sensors recorded radiation levels in your ship's logs that would be fatal to most known species within days," Draeth said. "Your medical records list diseases that have wiped out entire Coalition colonies in the past, referenced as minor seasonal concerns." For the first time, something flickered across Emma's face, not fear, but a kind of thoughtful recognition, as though she was only now realizing how strange her own world might look from the outside. "I suppose we don't really think about it that way," she said slowly. "It's just what we grew up with. You adapt to what you're given, and after a while, it stops feeling extreme. It just feels like Tuesday." A quiet murmur passed among the Coalition representatives at the table. Draeth held up a hand for silence, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "You understand," he said carefully, "that in Coalition records, species who evolve on worlds as hostile as yours are classified under a particular designation. We call them Deathworlders. Such species are typically treated with extreme caution, kept at a careful distance until their intentions are fully understood." "That sounds fair," Emma said. "I'd be cautious too, if I were you. But for what it's worth, we're not looking for a fight. We came out here because we're curious. Humans have always been curious. It's sort of our whole thing." Draeth exchanged a long look with Kessa, who gave the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement that whatever caution their protocols demanded, this woman did not read as a threat waiting to strike. And yet the data did not lie. A species that could shrug off radiation, disease, and extreme environmental punishment as ordinary daily life was, by every measure the Coalition understood, more dangerous than most weapons in their arsenal. "We will need to verify your claims," Draeth said finally. "A formal delegation will be arranged. Until then, you and your ship will remain under Coalition escort." "Sounds reasonable," Emma said easily. "Take all the time you need." I promise we're more interesting up close than we are on paper." As the guards led her toward the guest quarters prepared for her stay, Draeth remained at the table, staring at the data still glowing on the screen before him. Centuries of coalition history had taught him to fear certain things: overwhelming firepower, advanced technology, ancient empires with grudges older than written history. He had never once considered that the greatest unknown threat in the galaxy might simply be a species that had learned, through sheer stubborn survival, to treat catastrophe as background noise. "Kessa," he said quietly, once the chamber had emptied. "Send word to the High Council. Tell them we've found something new, something that doesn't fit any category we've built." "What should I tell them it is?" Kessa asked. Draeth looked once more at the frozen image of Emma Whitfield's calm, unbothered face on the screen. A woman who had walked into the heart of a warship, built to intimidate entire civilizations, and had done nothing more dramatic than apologize for the noise. "Tell them," he said slowly, "that we may have just met something the galaxy has never had to prepare for." Outside the chamber, unseen by either of them, Emma allowed herself a small private smile as she walked the unfamiliar corridors of the alien ship. She had expected suspicion. She had expected caution. What she had not expected was the flicker of something like fear behind the general's 4 steady eyes. A fear she recognized instantly, because it was the same look humans had once given to storms and disease, and the endless dangerous wilderness of their own world, right before they learned to call it home. 3 days passed aboard the Krivos Ascendant before the formal delegation arrived, and in that time, word of the strange new species had spread through every level of the ship. Crew members found excuses to walk past the guest quarters where Emma Whitfield was staying, hoping for a glimpse of the soft-skinned alien who had apparently laughed off radiation levels that would have killed most of them within a week. Emma, for her part, seemed entirely unbothered by the attention. She spent her mornings sketching notes about coalition technology in a small paper notebook she had brought from her ship, something that struck the crew as almost charmingly old-fashioned in an age of holographic displays and neural interfaces. She spent her afternoons in conversation with anyone willing to talk to her, asking questions about coalition history, alien biology, and the strange customs of a dozen different species, all with the same easy curiosity she had shown from the moment she arrived. "You ask a great many questions for someone who is supposed to be answering ours," Kessa said one afternoon, finding Emma seated near a viewport, watching the stars drift past. "I figure the more I understand about you, the better this all goes," Emma said. "Besides, I like learning things. Where I come from, that's considered a virtue." "Your species is unusual," Kessa admitted, settling into a seat across from her. "Most delegations we encounter arrive with lists of demands, or fear, or both. You arrive with curiosity." "Would you rather we brought demands?" Emma asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "No," Kessa said after a pause. "I find I prefer this." When the formal delegation finally convened, the council chamber was filled to capacity. Representatives from 6 coalition species sat around the long table, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to poorly hidden suspicion. General Draeth Sol presided at the head of the table, with Kessa seated at his right hand. "Ambassador Whitfield," Draeth began, "the coalition has reviewed the data collected from your vessel. We have questions, and we expect honest answers." "That's the only kind I know how to give," Emma said, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table. The questioning began cautiously at first, with representatives asking about Earth's location, its population, its governing structures. Emma answered each question directly, without evasion, sketching a picture of a world government still young, by coalition standards, still occasionally messy in its politics, but stable enough to send explorers out into the wider galaxy. Then the questions turned toward biology, and the room grew noticeably quieter. "Our records indicate your species can survive prolonged exposure to radiation levels that would be lethal to nearly every species in this room," said a coalition scientist named Yashel, her 4-fingered hands folded carefully on the table before her. "How is this possible?" "Evolution, mostly," Emma said. "Earth wasn't always kind to us. We had ice ages, meteor strikes, supervolcanoes, and diseases that wiped out huge portions of our early ancestors. The ones who survived passed on whatever traits helped them make it through." Do that enough times over a few 100,000 years, and you end up with a species that's harder to kill than most. You speak of these events so casually, Yeşil said, something like disbelief coloring her voice. I suppose we do, Emma admitted. It's just our history. Every species has one. Ours just happens to be a little more dramatic than most. A representative from a smaller coalition species, a delicate winged being named Ithril, leaned forward with visible unease. Your medical files reference something your species calls the influenza pandemic of 1918. Our historical archives contain records of similar outbreaks that ended entire colonies within coalition space. Your records indicate this event, while devastating, was survived and eventually overcome. It was a hard time, Emma said, her tone growing more serious. We lost a lot of people, but we learned from it. We got better at medicine, better at working together, better at understanding disease. It's a pattern you'll see a lot if you study our history. We get knocked down, and then we figure out how to get back up smarter than before. Draith watched the exchange carefully, noting the way the other representatives shifted in their seats, the careful looks exchanged between them. He had seen this reaction before, in smaller doses, when the coalition first encountered particularly hardy species from harsh worlds. But he had never seen it directed at a species that seemed, on the surface, so soft and vulnerable. There is a concern among this council, Draith said carefully, that a species capable of enduring such extremes might also be capable of significant destructive force, should circumstances turn hostile. Emma's expression softened, and for a moment, the sharp curiosity in her eyes gave way to something gentler. I understand the concern, truly, I do. If I were sitting where you are, I'd probably be asking the same questions, but I'd ask you to consider something. Surviving hardship doesn't make a species violent. Sometimes it makes them exactly the opposite. When you've spent generations learning how fragile life can be, you tend to value it more, not less. The chamber fell silent for a long moment. Draith found himself studying Emma's face, searching for any sign of the calculation or hidden agenda that experience had taught him to expect from skilled diplomats. He found none, only a quiet, steady conviction that seemed to come from somewhere deep and genuine. Perhaps a demonstration would help ease the council's concerns, Kessa suggested, breaking the silence. Rather than continuing to rely solely on data and testimony. What kind of demonstration? Emma asked, curiosity returning to her expression. There is a research outpost on a nearby moon, Draith said slowly, an idea forming as he spoke. A team of coalition surveyors has been studying its ecosystem for the past several months. The conditions there are considered extremely hazardous, even by coalition standards. If your species is truly as resilient as your records suggest, perhaps witnessing your people in such an environment would do more to convince this council than any amount of discussion. Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. You want to see us in action. Precisely, Draith said. That seems fair, Emma said after a moment's consideration. I'll need to speak with my crew, but I imagine they'd be willing. We didn't come all this way just to sit in meeting rooms. Later that evening, Emma returned to the horizon's edge, where her small crew waited for news of the negotiations. Captain Daniel Foxwell, a broad-shouldered man with a calm, steady presence, listened carefully as she relayed the details of the coalition's proposal. They want to test us, he said, leaning back in his chair. See if we're as tough as our medical records suggest. That's the gist of it, Emma said. A moon nearby, apparently hazardous enough that their own people are cautious about extended time there. What kind of hazardous are we talking about? Asked Lucy Bennett, the ship's engineer, looking up from the console she had been repairing. Toxic atmosphere pockets, extreme temperature swings, and some kind of native predator population, Emma said. Enough to make even the coalition nervous. Ryan Pierce, the ship's youngest crew member and its resident optimist, grinned from across the room. So basically a Tuesday back home. That's more or less how I put it to them, Emma said, a small smile crossing her face. You want us to volunteer, Daniel said, more statement than question. I think it's the right move, Emma said. Right now, they see us as numbers on a report. Radiation tolerances and disease resistance and survival statistics. If we go down there and simply do what we've always done, Treat a dangerous situation like a problem to be solved rather than a crisis to panic over. I think it will mean more to them than anything we could say in a meeting room." Daniel considered this for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly against the arm of his chair. "There's risk involved, even for us. We don't know this moon. We don't know what's actually down there beyond their reports." "There's always risk," Emma said, "but I think this is worth it. If we can show them we're not a threat, that we're capable and steady without being dangerous, it could open doors for humanity that we can't even imagine yet. First contact only happens once. I want to make sure we get it right." Around the room, the crew exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between people who had trained together, traveled together, and trusted each other through every hardship their journey had thrown at them so far. "I'm in," Lucy said simply. "Wouldn't miss it," Ryan added. Oliver Grant, the ship's quiet, thoughtful medic, nodded from his seat near the back of the room. "Someone should be there, in case things go sideways. Might as well be me." Daniel looked around at his crew, then back to Emma, and finally allowed himself a small, proud smile. "Looks like you've got your volunteers, Ambassador." The next morning, Emma returned to the Coalition Council chamber to deliver the news. Draith listened carefully as she explained that a team from her ship would be ready to depart for the moon within the day, prepared to assist the Coalition surveyors with whatever tasks were needed. "You understand the risks involved," Draith said, studying her carefully. "This is not a controlled demonstration. The conditions on that moon are genuinely dangerous. We would not ask this of most species." "I understand," Emma said, "and I appreciate the honesty. But I trust my crew, and I trust what our species has learned to handle over the years. If this is what it takes to build real trust between our people, then it's worth the risk." Draith nodded slowly, something unreadable passing behind his 4 steady eyes. "Very well. The mission will proceed at dawn. I will accompany the Coalition survey team myself, to observe firsthand." "I was hoping you would," Emma said. "Seeing is a lot more convincing than reading a report, don't you think?" For the first time since her arrival, Draith felt the corner of his mouth curve into something that might have been the beginning of a smile, quickly suppressed but not entirely hidden. "We shall see, Ambassador. We shall see." As the meeting adjourned, and the chamber slowly emptied, Kessa lingered behind, watching Draith stare thoughtfully at the star charts, displayed across the far wall, the moon in question, marked with a small, blinking warning symbol. "You believe her," Kessa said quietly. "I believe she believes herself," Draith replied. "Whether her species can truly deliver on the confidence she carries remains to be seen, but I confess, General, I find myself hoping that they can." Kessa raised an eyebrow, a rare gesture of surprise from someone who had spent decades cultivating an unreadable expression. "That is not a sentiment I expected from you." "Nor I," Draith admitted. "But there is something in the way she speaks of her people, of their history, their hardships, their stubborn refusal to be broken by any of it. It reminds me of stories my own grandmother used to tell, of our earliest ancestors clawing their way through the worst years of our homeworld's history. Perhaps that is why I find myself wanting to believe her." Outside the chamber windows, the moon in question hung silently in the darkness, its surface swirling with faint traces of toxic atmosphere, utterly indifferent to the enormous weight of expectation about to descend upon it. The shuttle carrying the human team broke through the moon's thin, toxic atmosphere just as the first tremors of the morning's seismic activity began rumbling through the ground below. Daniel Foxwell sat in the pilot's seat, guiding the small craft through swirling clouds of pale yellow gas that clung to the moon's jagged surface like a living thing. Beside him, Emma Whitfield studied a data display filled with readings that would have sent most Coalition scientists reaching for emergency evacuation protocols. "Atmosphere's worse than they told us," Lucy Bennett said from the seat behind them, her eyes scanning the same readings with the calm focus of an engineer who had spent years working with dangerous machinery. "Sulfur compounds mixed with something our sensors don't fully recognize. Breathing masks will hold, but I wouldn't want to test that theory for more than a few hours at a time." "Noted," Daniel said, easing the shuttle lower as the surface came into view, a barren landscape of cracked stone and steaming vents, lit by the pale glow of a distant, weak sun. "Ryan, how's the temperature looking?" "Currently sitting at a cool -40 degrees. Ryan Pierce reported from his console. But according to the Coalition data, it spikes to over 60 degrees during peak daylight hours. We've got about a 5-hour window before things get uncomfortable. Sounds like home, Oliver Grant said dryly, checking through his medical supplies one final time. Minus the 60-degree part, and the sulfur, and whatever's making those long claw marks on the Coalition survey photos. Focus, everyone, Emma said, though a small smile touched her lips. We're here to help the surveyors, and show the Coalition what we're capable of. Let's make it count. The shuttle landed near a small cluster of Coalition structures, half buried beneath drifts of pale volcanic ash. General Draith Sol and a team of Coalition soldiers were already waiting nearby, their heavy environmental suits bulky and cumbersome compared to the human team's lighter, more flexible gear. Ambassador, Draith said as Emma stepped down from the shuttle, his voice slightly muffled through his suit's external speaker. I confess, I did not expect you to arrive so quickly, or so lightly equipped. We travel light, Emma said. Where's the surveyor team? That is the concern, Draith said, his tone growing grave. 3 Coalition surveyors were conducting fieldwork near the northern ridge when the first tremors struck an hour ago. We lost contact shortly after. Given the terrain and the moon's unstable geology, we believe they may be trapped, possibly injured, in a region our own rescue teams have deemed too hazardous to approach without significant preparation. How far? Daniel asked, already checking the coordinates on his own display. 6 kilometers, through unstable terrain and active toxic vents, Draith said. Our teams estimate a 4-hour approach time, accounting for necessary caution. We can be there in 90 minutes, Lucy said, studying a topographical map that had already begun forming on her handheld device. Draith's 4 eyes widened slightly. That terrain is not passable at speed. The ground itself is unstable in places, prone to sudden collapse. We've handled unstable ground before, Emma said. Give us the coordinates and let us go. Every minute we spend discussing it is a minute those surveyors are out there without help. Draith hesitated only a moment before nodding, transmitting the coordinates to the human team's devices. I am coming with you, he said. I will not send anyone into danger. I am unwilling to face myself. Wouldn't have expected anything less, Emma said, already moving toward the ridge with long, purposeful strides. The human team moved quickly across the broken terrain, navigating cracks in the ground and clouds of toxic gas, with a practiced ease that left the accompanying Coalition soldiers struggling to keep pace. Daniel led the way, reading the shifting ground with an instinct born from years of wilderness survival training back on Earth, calling out warnings whenever the terrain grew particularly treacherous. Vent to your left, he called back, guiding the group around a hissing crack in the stone that spewed pale yellow gas into the freezing air. Don't breathe near it if you can help it, even with the masks. How did you know that vent was dangerous before your instruments even flagged it? Draith asked, struggling to match the human's pace despite his suit's mechanical assistance. Discoloration in the rock, Daniel said simply. Learned to read ground like this a long time ago. Different worlds, different signs, but the principle's mostly the same. Nature usually leaves warnings if you know how to look for them. They pressed onward as the ground occasionally trembled beneath their feet, small aftershocks rippling through the moon's unstable crust. At one point, a section of ground gave way entirely, just meters behind Oliver Grant, collapsing into a dark fissure, with a low, groaning crash. He barely flinched, adjusting his stride without breaking pace. Everyone all right? Emma called back. All good, Oliver replied, just the ground being dramatic. Draith found himself staring at the young medic, momentarily stunned by the casual dismissal of what would have been, by Coalition standards, a near-catastrophic close call. They reached the northern ridge just under 90 minutes after departing, exactly as Lucy had predicted. The area was a maze of jagged rock formations and steaming vents, the ground scarred with deep cracks from the recent tremors. It took only a few minutes of searching before Ryan spotted a faint distress signal flickering weakly from a partially collapsed rock formation. Over here, he called, already moving toward the source. They found the 3 Coalition surveyors trapped beneath a partially collapsed rock shelter, pinned by fallen stone, and struggling against injuries sustained during the initial tremor. One of them, a young alien named Tessic, had a clearly damaged leg, his environmental suit torn along one side, exposing him to the toxic atmosphere seeping steadily into the enclosed space. "Oliver, with me," Emma said immediately, moving toward the trapped surveyors while the rest of the team began assessing the fallen rock. "Lucy, Ryan, see what we can do about that stone without bringing the rest of this shelter down on top of them." The next several minutes passed in focused, efficient motion. Lucy quickly identified the load-bearing sections of fallen rock, directing the team on where they could safely apply pressure without risking further collapse. Ryan and Daniel worked together, using improvised leverage from broken support beams scattered nearby, gradually shifting the heaviest stones aside inch by inch. Oliver crouched beside Tessic, quickly sealing the tear in his suit with a portable patch kit, before administering something from his medical supplies to counteract the toxic exposure already affecting the young alien's system. Draith watched the entire operation unfold with growing astonishment. There was no panic among the humans, no hesitation, no wasted movement. Each member of the team seemed to instinctively understand their role, communicating in short, efficient bursts, adapting instantly whenever the situation shifted. It was, he realized, not unlike watching a team that had trained for this exact scenario countless times before, except he knew for a fact that none of them had ever set foot on this moon prior to today. "Got it," Daniel grunted as the final heavy stone shifted free, allowing Lucy and Ryan to carefully pull the two remaining trapped surveyors free from the rubble. "Tessic's stable for now," Oliver reported, "but he needs proper medical attention soon. The toxin exposure isn't something my field kit can fully counter." "Then we move quickly," Emma said, already helping to support the injured surveyor's weight. "Same path back. Watch for aftershocks." The return journey proved even more challenging than the approach, as the moon's geological instability continued worsening, with tremors growing more frequent, and the toxic atmosphere thickening in certain low-lying areas. At one particularly difficult crossing, a narrow rock bridge spanning a deep fissure began crumbling beneath their combined weight, just as the last of the group made their way across. "Move, now," Daniel shouted, practically hauling Ryan and one of the injured surveyors across the final unstable section as the bridge collapsed entirely into the darkness below, mere seconds after the last person cleared it. For a brief moment, the group stood in stunned silence, staring at the newly formed gap where solid ground had been only seconds before. Then, almost in unison, the human team simply adjusted their route and kept moving, their pace barely slowed by an event that had left the accompanying coalition soldiers visibly shaken. "Is this normal for you?" Draith asked, jogging to keep pace with Emma as they continued toward the extraction point. "Not exactly normal," Emma admitted, "but not exactly surprising either. When you grow up on a world that occasionally tries to shake you off its surface, you learn to keep moving instead of freezing up. Panic gets people killed. Focus keeps them alive." They reached the shuttle just as the moon's daylight cycle began shifting, temperatures climbing steadily as the pale sun rose higher in the swirling sky. Oliver immediately transferred Tessic and the other injured surveyors to proper medical stabilization equipment aboard the shuttle, working alongside the human team's more basic supplies to ensure all three coalition surveyors were secure and treated before the return flight began. As the shuttle lifted off from the moon's surface, leaving the dangerous terrain behind, Draith found himself seated across from Emma, studying her with an expression that mixed exhaustion, respect, and something that bordered on genuine wonder. "You saved 3 of my people today," he said quietly, "in terrain my own rescue teams considered too dangerous to approach without hours of preparation. Your team moved with barely any hesitation." "We just did what needed doing," Emma said, though the pride in her voice was unmistakable, as she glanced toward her exhausted but clearly satisfied crew. "That's sort of who we are. Give us a problem, even a dangerous one, and we'll find a way through it. Comes from a long history of not having much choice in the matter." Draith looked toward Tessic, now resting peacefully under the combined care of Coalition and human medical treatment. His condition stabilized well ahead of what Coalition protocols would have predicted, given the severity of his injuries and toxin exposure. "I came to this moon expecting to observe a demonstration," Draith admitted. "Instead, I witnessed something closer to a miracle. Your species speaks of survival as though it were simply a matter of routine, and yet what I saw today was nothing short of extraordinary." Maybe that's the difference in perspective, Emma said thoughtfully. What looks extraordinary to you looks like a normal Tuesday to us. And I imagine there are things your species does without a second thought that would leave us absolutely amazed. Drayeth considered this for a long moment as the shuttle carried them back toward the waiting Krivos ascendant, the dangerous moon shrinking steadily behind them. Perhaps, he said finally, it is time this council stopped measuring your species by the standards we use for everyone else, and started asking what standards might actually apply to you. Emma smiled, watching the stars slowly emerge as the shuttle broke free of the moon's toxic atmosphere. Now that, she said, sounds like real progress. News of the rescue spread through the Krivos ascendant faster than any official report could have managed, carried from crew member to crew member, until it seemed the entire ship had heard some version of the story by the time Emma and her team returned. Coalition soldiers who had once eyed the humans with wary suspicion now offered nods of respect as they passed through the corridors. Even Yashel, the cautious coalition scientist who had questioned Emma so pointedly during the earlier hearing, approached the human team with a request to formally document their physiological responses during the rescue mission. Your team's vital signs during the operation, Yashel said, reviewing data on a handheld display as she walked alongside Emma toward the ship's research wing, show almost no elevation in stress indicators, even during the moments when the rock bridge collapsed. By coalition standards, that response is almost unprecedented. We train for high-pressure situations, Emma explained. But honestly, I think a lot of it comes from something deeper than training. Something built into us over a very long time. That is precisely what the Council wishes to understand, Yashel said. General Drayeth has called for a full historical review of your species, compiled by our top scientists and historians. He believes understanding your homeworld more completely may be the key to understanding what your species truly represents to the wider galaxy. The review took place over the following 2 days, conducted in the same council chamber where Emma had first faced the Coalition's questions. This time, however, the atmosphere felt markedly different. Where suspicion had once dominated the room, something closer to fascinated curiosity now filled the air as Coalition historians and scientists presented their findings to an assembly that had grown to include representatives from every major Coalition species. Earth's history, began the lead historian, an elderly alien named Korvath Day, reveals a pattern our own scholars have rarely encountered in such extreme concentration. Multiple mass extinction events survived, not through fortunate circumstance, but through repeated evolutionary adaptation across countless generations. Volcanic winters, catastrophic asteroid impacts, sudden and violent shifts in global climate. And through it all, evidence suggests the ancestors of modern humanity not only survived, but gradually expanded across nearly every environment their world contained, from freezing polar regions to scorching deserts, to dense, dangerous jungles, teeming with predators far larger and more aggressive than the species itself. Drayeth listened carefully from his seat at the head of the table, watching the reactions ripple across the assembled representatives, as image after image flashed across the chamber's central display, depicting Earth's varied and often brutal landscapes. Perhaps most notable, Korvath continued, is the apparent psychological adaptation accompanying humanity's physical resilience. Historical records suggest that rather than developing widespread trauma responses to their world's extreme conditions, as our own species' history might predict, humans instead developed cultural frameworks that treated hardship as a natural and expected part of life. Stories, traditions, and even entertainment across human history frequently center around themes of overcoming adversity, suggesting a species that has not merely endured difficulty, but has, in some fundamental sense, learned to find meaning and even purpose within it. This aligns with what we observed during the rescue mission, Kessa added from her seat beside Drayeth. The human team displayed no signs of the trauma responses we would typically expect following such a dangerous operation. If anything, their morale appeared to improve following the successful rescue, despite the clear danger they had faced. A representative from a smaller coalition species, the winged Ithril who had questioned Emma so nervously during the first hearing, raised a trembling hand. If I may ask a difficult question, given this species' apparent comfort with danger and hardship, should this council not consider the possibility that humanity represents Not merely a resilient species, but potentially a dangerous one. A species so accustomed to conflict with their environment might struggle to find peaceful accommodation with others. The question hung heavily in the chamber, and Draeth noted several representatives nodding slowly in agreement. Old fears resurfacing despite the growing respect the human team had earned over the past several days. A fair concern, Draeth said before the silence could stretch too long. And one I confess crossed my own mind upon first reviewing their data. But consider this. During the rescue mission, the human team's first and only priority was the safety of coalition personnel they had never met, from a species they had only just encountered. They risked their own safety repeatedly, without hesitation, to protect strangers. If humanity were the aggressive, conflict-driven species some among us fear, would such selfless action truly be their first instinct? Perhaps it was strategic, Ithril pressed. A demonstration meant to earn our trust before revealing less peaceful intentions. Perhaps, Draeth acknowledged, though I have spent considerable time in the ambassador's presence over these past days, and I find myself increasingly convinced that what we have witnessed is not calculation, but genuine character. Still, this council's caution is not without merit. I propose we continue our observation, gathering further evidence before reaching any final judgment regarding humanity's place among the coalition's allies. The proposal received general agreement, and the historical review continued through the remainder of the day, painting an increasingly detailed picture of humanity's long and difficult journey from a fragile, struggling species to one capable of surviving conditions that would have ended most coalition species many times over. That evening, Emma found herself walking the observation deck alongside Draeth, the two of them watching the distant stars in comfortable silence for several minutes before either spoke. "Your historians did a remarkably thorough job today," Emma said eventually. "Some of what they uncovered, I confess I hadn't fully considered before. It's strange, hearing your own history laid out so plainly by outside eyes. Makes you see things a little differently." "I imagine it does," Draeth said. "I found myself equally affected, listening to the full scope of what your species has endured. It reminded me of stories from my own world's early history, though I confess, even our most difficult chapters seem almost gentle by comparison." "Every world has its own kind of hard," Emma said. "I don't think it does anyone good to compare too closely." "What matters more, I think, is what a species chooses to become once they've made it through the difficulty. Some species might have grown bitter, or fearful, or aggressive toward anything unfamiliar. We tried to become something else instead." "And what is that?" Draeth asked. Emma considered the question for a long moment, watching the slow drift of distant stars, curious mostly, determined to understand rather than destroy, hopeful, even when hope doesn't always come easily. I like to think that's the best thing to come out of everything we've survived. Not toughness for its own sake, but the kind of toughness that leaves room for kindness too. Draeth was quiet for a while, processing her words with the same careful consideration he applied to every important decision in his long military career. "There remains division among the council," he admitted finally. "Some still fear what your species represents. Others, myself included, have begun to see something different, something worth the risk of trust. That's really all any of us can ask for," Emma said. "The chance to be understood, rather than just feared. I believe," Draeth said slowly, "that chance may yet be within reach, though I suspect there remains one final test before the full council will be convinced." "What kind of test?" Emma asked, though something in her expression suggested she already anticipated the answer. "A formal proposal," Draeth said. "An alliance between our peoples, presented before the full Coalition High Council. It will require every scrap of evidence we have gathered, along with considerable persuasion, to overcome the doubts that remain. I intend to make that proposal myself, Ambassador, but I will need your continued cooperation, and perhaps your patience, as we prepare for what promises to be a difficult presentation." Emma turned to face him fully, something resolute settling into her expression. "You'll have both. Humanity didn't come this far by giving up when things got difficult. If there's a chance for real peace and real partnership between our peoples, I intend to see it through." Draeth studied her for a long moment, 4 steady eyes reflecting the distant starlight, before offering a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture he had come to understand carried the same weight among his own people that a firm handshake carried among humans. "Then let us prepare," he said, "for what may prove to be the most important presentation of my career." Behind them, the stars continued their slow, silent drift, indifferent witnesses to the quiet beginning of an alliance neither species could have predicted, only a handful of days before. The High Council chamber aboard the Coalition capital station dwarfed anything Emma had encountered so far in her time among the stars. Vast and circular, with tiered seating rising toward a ceiling so high it seemed to disappear into shadow, the chamber had been built to hold representatives from every member species across Coalition space. Today, every seat was filled. Hundreds of delegates gathered to hear a proposal that had sparked fierce debate across Coalition worlds in the weeks since news of humanity's discovery had spread. Emma stood at the center platform, Daniel Foxwell and the rest of her crew seated in a reserved section nearby, while General Draith Soul took his place beside her, his uniform bearing the formal markings of his rank and the weight of the reputation he had built defending this very proposal through countless preliminary hearings. "Members of the High Council," Draith began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "3 weeks ago, my ship encountered a vessel from a species previously unknown to this coalition. In that time, I have witnessed firsthand the character, capability, and conduct of the human species, and I stand before you today to formally propose an alliance between our coalition and the people of Earth." A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembled delegates, some nodding in evident agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances with their neighbors. Draith continued, methodically presenting the evidence gathered over the preceding weeks, the historical review of Earth's brutal evolutionary history, the detailed account of the rescue mission on the toxic moon, testimony from Coalition personnel who had worked alongside the human crew. When he finished, the chamber's presiding officer, an ancient and respected delegate named Vosek Thane, gestured for the floor to open to questions and objections. Immediately, delegates from several species rose, eager to voice the concerns that had been building since word of humanity's existence first reached the wider coalition. "This council has spent centuries developing careful protocols regarding Deathworld species," said a delegate representing one of the coalition's founding members, his tone sharp with lingering suspicion. "Protocols built on hard experience, following conflicts with species whose evolutionary hardiness translated directly into aggressive expansion and territorial conquest. What guarantee does this council have that humanity will not follow that same troubling pattern once their confidence in our goodwill grows sufficiently secure?" Draith opened his mouth to respond, but Emma raised a hand gently, silently requesting permission to speak instead. Draith nodded, stepping back to allow her the floor. "I understand that fear," Emma said, her voice steady, despite the weight of hundreds of alien eyes fixed upon her. "And I won't pretend humanity's history is free of conflict. We've fought each other plenty of times over the long, complicated course of our history. We're not a perfect species, and I won't stand here and claim otherwise." The honesty in her admission seemed to catch several delegates off guard, quieting some of the murmuring that had followed the initial objection. "But here's what I'd ask this council to consider," Emma continued. "Every conflict in our history eventually taught us something. We learned, slowly, and sometimes painfully, that our greatest strength was never really about how much hardship we could survive. It was about what we chose to build once we made it through. We built medicine that saved millions of lives. We built systems of cooperation between people who once considered each other enemies. We built curiosity strong enough to send us out here, to your part of the galaxy, not with weapons raised, but with open hands and open questions." She paused, letting her words settle across the vast chamber before continuing. "You're right to be cautious. I'd ask the same questions in your position. But resilience isn't the same thing as aggression. We didn't survive our world by conquering it. We survived by learning to understand it, to work with it, even when it seemed determined to destroy us. That's the same approach we'd like to bring to this alliance, if you'll have us. Understanding, not conquest. Partnership, not domination." Another delegate, this one representing a species with a long history of territorial disputes with more aggressive Deathworld species, rose with obvious hesitation. "Words are easily spoken, Ambassador. Actions carry greater weight. What assurance can your species offer beyond testimony and rescued surveyors?" This time, it was Tessic, the young coalition surveyor whose life had been saved during the rescue mission, who rose from his seat in the gallery, his leg still bearing the marks of his recent injury, though fully healed, thanks to the combined efforts of coalition and human medical treatment. "If the council will permit," Tessic said, his voice slightly unsteady with nerves at addressing such a large gathering, "I would like to offer my own testimony. 3 weeks ago, I was trapped and injured on a hostile moon. My survival far from certain, given the conditions and the delay coalition rescue protocols would have required. The human team that arrived to help me had no obligation to risk their own safety for a stranger from an entirely unfamiliar species, and yet they did so without hesitation, working alongside coalition personnel with skill and courage I have rarely witnessed even among our own most experienced rescue teams. I owe my life to their actions. I do not offer this testimony lightly, nor do I offer it as mere sentiment. I offer it as evidence, freely given, that whatever else humanity may be, they are a species capable of genuine compassion, even toward those who owe them nothing." A weighty silence followed Tessic's words, settling over the chamber as delegates considered the young surveyor's heartfelt testimony. Vosek Thane, the presiding officer, allowed the silence to stretch for a long moment before speaking again. "The council has heard compelling testimony, both in favor and in caution, regarding this proposed alliance," Vosek said. "Before we proceed to formal deliberation, I would ask General Draeth Sol one final question. You have spent more time among the humans than perhaps anyone else in this chamber. Setting aside data and testimony, I ask for your personal judgment. Do you believe, in your own heart, that humanity is worthy of this coalition's trust?" Draeth stepped forward, his 4 eyes moving briefly to Emma, before addressing the full assembly. "When I first encountered the ambassador's vessel," he began, "I expected, based on centuries of coalition experience, to find either a threat to be neutralized or a curiosity to be catalogued and kept carefully at a distance. Instead, I found a species that met suspicion with patience, danger with courage, and unfamiliarity with genuine curiosity rather than fear. I have watched Ambassador Whitfield and her crew risk their lives for strangers, answer difficult questions with uncomfortable honesty, and treat every member of this coalition, regardless of species or status, with the same fundamental respect." He paused, drawing a slow breath before continuing. "I came to this chamber, prepared to present evidence and testimony in favor of this alliance, but if the council asks for my personal judgment, I will say this. I believe humanity does not merely deserve our trust. I believe, in time, they may become among the coalition's most valuable allies, not because of their extraordinary resilience alone, but because of the character that resilience has helped shape within them. It is my honor to formally recommend this alliance proceed." The chamber erupted into a mixture of murmured discussion, scattered applause from several delegate sections, and continued cautious silence from others, still weighing the weight of the decision before them. Vosek Thane allowed the reaction to settle, before calling for a formal vote, the results of which would be tallied and announced following a brief recess. During the recess, Emma found herself standing near the chamber's outer viewport, alongside Draeth, both watching the slow rotation of the coalition capital station against the endless backdrop of stars. "Whatever the outcome," Draeth said quietly, "I want you to know that these past weeks have changed my understanding of what this galaxy contains. I came into this expecting to catalog another dangerous Deathworld species. Instead, I found something I did not know I was searching for." "And what's that?" Emma asked. "Hope," Draeth said simply, "that perhaps the harshest beginnings do not have to determine the kindest endings. That a species forged by hardship can still choose compassion over conquest, curiosity over conflict. Your people have shown me that, and I suspect this council, whatever they ultimately decide today, has been shown it as well." Emma smiled, watching the stars continue their slow, patient drift. "That's about the nicest thing anyone said to me since we left Earth." When the council reconvened, Vosek Thane rose to announce the results of the vote, the chamber falling into tense, expectant silence as every delegate waited to hear the decision that would shape the future of 2 very different species. "By clear majority," Vosek announced, "this council formally approves the proposed alliance between the coalition and the people of Earth. Let this decision stand as recognition that resilience, when guided by conscience, becomes not a danger to be feared, but a strength to be welcomed. The chamber broke into a wave of reaction, ranging from enthusiastic approval to quiet, thoughtful acceptance among the more cautious delegates. Emma felt Daniel's hand clap warmly against her shoulder from behind, and turned to see her entire crew beaming with quiet pride at what they had accomplished together. In the weeks that followed, the alliance between humanity and the Coalition began taking shape in earnest. Joint research stations were established, allowing human and Coalition scientists and engineers to work side by side, each bringing unique strengths, shaped by their vastly different homeworlds. Human engineers found themselves casually adapting to environments that left their Coalition counterparts astonished, working comfortably in conditions of reduced oxygen, extreme temperature, and minimal gravity that would have required extensive protective measures for most Coalition species. Aboard one such joint station, months after the historic council vote, Draith found himself walking alongside Emma through corridors filled with the productive hum of human and Coalition personnel, working together toward shared goals neither species could have achieved alone. "It seems your species continues to surprise us," Draith said, watching a team of human engineers casually adjusting equipment in a section of the station maintained at a temperature that left the nearby Coalition workers bundled in heavy thermal gear. "I begin to wonder if there exists any environment truly capable of troubling humanity." "Oh, plenty of things trouble us," Emma said with a small laugh. "We just don't let it stop us from getting the job done. I think that's the real lesson here, if there is one. It was never really about being indestructible. It was about refusing to give up, even when things get difficult. Any species can learn that, given the right kind of history, and the right kind of heart to carry it forward." Draith considered her words as they continued walking, watching the easy cooperation unfolding around them, human and Coalition workers laughing together over shared meals, exchanging stories from their vastly different worlds, building something neither species could have created alone. "Perhaps," he said finally, "the galaxy has been asking the wrong question all along. Not which species is the most dangerous, but which species is most willing to turn their strength toward kindness, once given the chance." Emma smiled, watching the station's artificial lights glimmer softly against the endless darkness of space beyond the viewport, a darkness that no longer felt quite so unknown, now that two very different worlds had found common ground within it. "That," she said, "sounds like exactly the kind of question worth spending a few centuries answering together." And so, beneath the quiet light of distant stars, humanity's place among the Coalition began not with conquest or fear, but with rescue, honesty, and the slow, steady building of trust between worlds that had once known only each other's darkness, now finally learning to share the light.